Welcome back to the channel, chess friends. Today we return with our rules format, and we return with one of the sacred monsters of the chess world, probably the strongest chess player of all time. Ladies and gentlemen, Garry Kasparov. Today we will analyze a very beautiful game of his against Grandmaster Lajos Portish. This is a game from 1983, and as always, we will try to extrapolate, let's say, some middle game rules drawn from the game we are going to see today. Let's start the game right away because we have a lot to say. So let's put the opening on the board immediately. This queen's pawn game turns into a queen's Indian. And in this position, let's say generally white, here Kasparov plays move 3. Why does he play this move? Because naturally he would like to. He takes more space with moves like queen c2 and e4. Obviously, he doesn't want to get hit with the move bishop b4, a typical move of the Nimzo Indian. For this very reason, he doesn't start with knight c3 because otherwise bishop b4 comes and it's the Nimzo Indian. He starts with knight f3. So these are choices. Therefore, here a 3 is perfectly relevant to the desire to avoid this type of Nimzo Indian structure at all costs. Rightly, black doesn't just stand by and plays the move d5. This is somewhat the structure that is generated from this queen's Indian, but let's move forward a bit so we can start establishing these rules. Pawn takes d5, a very common move because having played the move b6, at this point black can no longer set up a structure with c6 Kasparov style because c6 would be backward on an open file and so white captures on d5. These are all, let's say, opening concepts. And after knight takes, at this point there are several opportunities, but Kasparov chooses the most solid one with e3, knight takes c3, b takes c3, bishop e7. Here we are already establishing the first rule that we are extrapolating from today's video. First rule, if we have the opportunity to, let's say, damage the opponent's position or at least hinder their development, it's definitely something we should do, especially if it's free. Here in particular, we already have a very free move that improves our position and worsens theirs. If you want, pause the video to find it. Okay, let's look at this move. The move is bishop to b5 check. Now, the b5 square is not the ideal square for this bishop. Let's say this bishop obviously wants to go to d3. d3 is its ideal square, and there's no arguing about that. However, with bishop to b5, let's say black has a real problem. The big problem is that he can't just easily play the knight because this knight to e5 comes in, which is as big as a house. And let's just say the problems are very big. For this reason, black is forced into a move like c6 here, and we now go back having caused him to make this move. This move here is obviously a problem for him because the pawn blocks the bishop, blocks a square for the knight. So let's say we have definitely worsened his position for free. Black now plays c5. And this for me is an important moment where I want to make you reflect for a second. So you might think that white's bishop to b5 move was useless. Like, oh well, black played c5 anyway, maybe they would have played it regardless. So what was the point of bishop to b5 if black plays c5 anyway? In reality, Kasparov's move was very useful because black was now forced to play c5. So pay attention, it's different between I have to rather than I can. So in this position, for example, after bishop to d3, black could have played castling short and d-in at their leisure, perhaps chosen whether to play c5 or not. In this position, however, after I gave check and c6 was played, I now have to play c5 to give my pieces a bit of breathing room. So let's say it's not that black would have done it anyway, but we forced black to do it, so in effect it was a worsening for him. Only slightly, but again it was free, and so we must do it. Chess is the sum of many small micro advantages, and in this case the micro advantage is that we forced him to make a move rather than perhaps leaving him the flexibility to make others. Castling short, knight c6, and now we arrive at the second rule. White certainly has a good position, but nothing special yet. What could the second rule be? Well, the second rule is a coordination rule, so placing the pieces in the right positions. White really shouldn't rush into things here, okay? A move that might look tempting is maybe playing e4, just to take some extra space in the center. But you need to be careful about your timing. Careful, e4 is not a wrong move here, it's a perfectly playable move, but look at how Kasparov plays in this position. Instead of immediately making clear what his expansion push is going to be, he first organizes all his pieces without giving away whether he might want to play e4 or maybe c4. Depending on what black does now, maybe one of the two could be stronger. So why should I spoil my plans here by making the move e4? So in the meantime, I'll organize my pieces. The bishop needs to go to b2, the queen needs to go to e2, the rook needs to go to d1, and now that we've improved all our pieces, we can evaluate. Is it better for us to play e4 or is it better for us to play c4? Well, Kasparov rightly evaluates here that there is one last piece that wants to be improved, the bishop on b2. Certainly f4 is a reasonable move, it's perfectly playable, but he plays c4 because he wants to give this bishop some air. So let's activate all the pieces. cxt4, pawn cxt4, na5. At this point we arrive at the third rule. White has done exactly what they needed to do. They damaged black's development a bit and put their pieces in the ideal positions. Now you see all of white's pieces. Look at how beautiful they are, nice and active, right? Nice rook here. Okay, maybe only rook to e1 is missing, but you see that at this moment, black has placed their pieces a bit poorly, right? The knight on a5 is on the side. Anyway, the bishop on e7 is a little bit passive. The other rook is not yet active. Good. So what can we say? We can say that white in this position has a dynamic advantage thanks to the better development of their pieces and obviously also thanks to central control. So, third rule, when we have a dynamic advantage, we must take advantage of it by opening the position. We must open hostilities. If we don't open the position, our dynamic advantage is absolutely useless to us. So what are we going to evaluate here? We are going to evaluate moves that open the position. Also, because watch out, I can't play rook to a1. Watch out, the pawn on c4 is hanging. So here, if I want to do something, I have to do something energetic. Otherwise, I'm forced to sadly defend the pawn on c4 with a move like rook to c1. But rook to c1 is not a good move because the rook is now defending a pawn, whereas before it was well placed and black can turn the momentum around, right? For example, bishop to f6, and then now he plays this. You see how black's pieces immediately come into play, eh? Maybe bishop to a6 to put pressure here. So watch out for the momentum. When the momentum is favorable, we must exploit it. How do we exploit it? By striking, by opening up the position. So what does Kasparov play? d5. Opening up the position and activating all his pieces. xd5, cxd5, and at this point you see how now black's pieces are starting to look a bit suspicious, right? The bishop is only defended by the queen. I have the two bishops attacking anyway. My queen can come into play, also threatening mate with queen 4. At this point, therefore, black takes the pawn on d5 anyway, because even the pawn on d5, mind you, is tough, that d5 pawn. For example, I don't know, rook to e8 to try and discover an attack on the queen, queen to a4, g6, perfect. Also bishop to b5, you see, there is practically, that rook doesn't have a stable square. This is because the pawn on d5 also provides control over important squares. So here I can't defend, for example, with bishop to c6, right? So the pawn on d5, well, it also takes away space, it does that too. And so here, rightly, Portish decides to take it, but obviously the tactics are on the side of the one who is attacking and has more dynamism, and obviously it's on Garry Kasparov's side. Needless to say, obviously, bishop takes a7, which might seem dubious according to the computer, but in reality it's a move that wins very simply, because after rook takes d5, white regains the material but still keeps the initiative. And here, simply put, another move of great class. If you want, pause the video and let's try to figure out the move with which Kasparov closed this game. There, the move here is bishop takes g7. This is also considered dubious by the engine, but it doesn't, because the engine evaluates that one could have played rook h5 first, but it doesn't matter. Bishop takes g7 is equally good and in fact breaks the game open tactically. King takes g7, knight e5, 5. You see how white's pieces are now arriving in a very, very aggressive way. Rook away necessary, you need to clear the square for the king. Queen check kf8, but now queen f5. Again, we are generating threat after threat. At this point, let's say one must defend with f6, but naturally the knight now enters vigorously on d7 and the game doesn't really have much left to say because black has to give up this exchange. For example, if I were to move the king, queen h7, and basically on this one there is checkmate here. And on this one, let's say there are multiple ways to deliver checkmate. You could probably even sacrifice the rook like this. This, and then queen e4, and I'd say this here is checkmate. There were also other ways to win, and so at this point, black already has to give up the first exchange. Rook takes, maybe just the exchange, also obviously offensive problems. Queen to c5. When we have a dynamic advantage and we are attacking, we don't trade pieces. Bonus rule. This one is on the house. Queen to h7, you know it. I always tell you, right? Queen to h7, rook c7. He gave a check first, and then we are in a dynamic advantage. We are playing to attack, so do we trade pieces? Rook to d3, and after that, well, for Garry, it's enough to bring in the last attacker. Rook to d1, and now it's just a matter of technique. Black plays knight e5, but it's not like there were many other alternatives. Queen h7. Here the conclusion is very aesthetic. Let's see it together. Queen h7 check, king a6, queen g8 check. The king now has to go to f5. And now the move g4, very beautiful, which obviously exploits the overload of the knight. You see, I can't take it. There's also checkmate, but at the very least, rook d5 and I take the queen, so I have to go with the king to f4. But obviously the king is wandering a bit too far. After king f3 comes queen b3 check, and there's nothing to be done, right? The only way to defend against this queen b3 check is to play queen to c3, and at this point you can simply take the queen with the move rook d3. But okay, more simply, there is a mate in two. This one, and this one. And here, yeah, well, you have to give up the queen and say goodbye. This is a beautiful game by Kasparov, which shows us how an attacking player doesn't just finish the attack in a tactical way. He was fantastic, right, in the sacrifice. But above all, what strikes me about this game is the construction of the attack. That is, the pieces that come before the tactical blow. I mean, it's not a coincidence. That tactical blow was built up long before. Very, very beautiful. This is the first Kasparov game I'm bringing to the channel, but not the last. Write in the comments if you want to see more, and as always, if you like this channel and want to support the content, subscribe, like, hype, and leave a tactical comment. Especially let me know if you like this format of the rules, which I hadn't done for a while and I'm trying to bring back. And that's it, I'll see you all in the next videos.